Good morning again. I'm John Lapp, part of Mennonite Mission Network's leadership team and acting director for Asia and Middle East. Welcome to Hope Around the World partner interview. We are welcoming back again Dr. Myrrl Byler, who has been the executive director of Mennonite Partners in China for about 30 years. Myrrl, we last talked about the church in China and how Mennonites have connected to it in the past few years. A lot of people, I think one could say, don't understand China in North America, Americans. I'd be interested to know whether you have some insights that could help us understand some of the ways that the Chinese government thinks in particular, but maybe broader than that, you could help us understand if there are different modes of thinking or different patterns of thinking in China more broadly, and how that affects how we see things there.
Well, thanks, John, for the opportunity to be with you again. I suppose that if you read the news at all, we should actually know a lot about China, simply because every day there is something in the news. I've not done the statistics, but I'm guessing if you look over the last few years, the negative when it comes to China is probably nearly 100%, with very little positive presented. But that's the way news is. I understand that. So perhaps what I can do is just share some of my, or what I would call some of the misunderstandings about China. Because I think there are, despite everything that is in the news and all that one can learn by reading the news and watching the news, there's still a lot of misunderstandings. And I also want to not put myself forward as an expert. I don't think, sometimes my friends in China call me a China expert, and I always then use that as an opportunity to explain to them what an oxymoron is. And that being from outside of China and posing as a China expert is just, they don't go together. That said, I will blunder ahead. I think first is to rid ourselves of the understanding of China as somehow akin to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc countries, and especially when we use the term communist. Certainly in China, people still talk about communism, and we talk about the Chinese Communist Party, which rules China. However, in reality, Marxism, Leninism, communism no longer plays the same role as it did in China for many, many years. Instead, what we see is China is much more focused on its more distant past. China's time as a superpower, China's time as what they call a great state, for many, many, many centuries up until the 1700s. China was the most developed state in the world. It had the greatest outreach. Wealth, inventions. We could go on and on about China's role in the world at that during up until the late 1700s. So what China is now doing is it is finding ways to return to that past history. And as one writer said, we should no longer refer to it as the Chinese Communist Party. We should refer to the government as the Chinese Civilizational Party. It doesn't quite trip off the tongue as well, but it's probably, it's more accurate. Because what China is doing is it's looking at its past history, it's looking at emperors, it's looking at various dynasties, and it's saying we really need to discover again and to build upon our past history. The fact that they still use the word communist is a matter of convention, I guess. But when you when you look at what China is doing, whether it's in Hong Kong, for instance, um, it's best not to think about, oh, this is a communist government doing this to the people of Hong Kong. But it's you look at, no, this is China. This is thousands of years, excuse me, thousands of years of history. And to see what is happening, you understand it much, much better if you understand Chinese history than simply looking and saying, oh, this is a communist thing. It's not helpful, really, in understanding China. A second misperception is, and this is one that we in the West have had now for a number of decades, is that the more China opens up, the more economically well off it becomes, the more Chinese young people who study overseas, the more North Americans who live and work in China, the more businesses go back and forth. The idea is, well, the more China will continue to open up, and the more China will become a part of the Western world. It will fit into the Western construct, much the same way South Korea has, Japan has, Singapore, other emerging or other places that have emerged over the past number of decades. The truth is that's not happening. Certainly, China has become much, much more modern, and you can see lots of things that you think of as Western, but that does not mean that China has and is becoming Western. I would say what's happening is China is creating, I've termed it a parallel world or another reality, where they are building their own system. They are building their own way of life that is, in many ways, in competition with the Western world. And so that's why you see all this stuff, the things in the press about Huawei, or you see things about TikTok, or you see things about WeChat, and the list could go on and on. It's in banking, it's in overseas investment, it's in coalitions. China is building its own world, which is in some ways parallel to the Western one. So it's kind of almost like you're going to have two internets, and you're going to have two ways of doing a lot of different things. So instead of becoming more Western, China in some ways is becoming more Chinese. It's becoming more separate, and we need to stop thinking of China as just another country. China is here to stay. It's not going to be changing most likely in any significant way, as a lot of people think that it might or it will. I'd say another major misperception is that people from outside of China sometimes think that the Chinese people themselves, that they feel oppressed and that they don't like their government, and they're just waiting for an opportunity to overthrow them and to bring about Western democracy within their country. And you see that when you read, the press will occasionally, they'll put something out there from a dissident or someone who's been arrested or someone who says something negative about the party. And these are really, really major exceptions. This is not what people in China are thinking. The vast majority of people in China are quite happy with their government. They feel very satisfied with their national government, especially. Sometimes not so much the local governments, because they can have corruption problems. But especially with the national government, they feel that they are there to help them and to take care of them. Would they like to have more freedom? Yes. Do they sometimes chafe a bit at some of the laws? Yes. But in general, they're quite happy. And certainly what has happened in the last 5-6 months is example number one, because now they are looking, many of my friends tell me, we're looking at the US totally different than we used to. We used to look at the US as this modern, wonderful place where everything just works perfectly. And suddenly we realize that's not the case. Suddenly they realize that, our government, heavy-handed as it is, we've been able to totally control the pandemic. Our lives are basically back to normal. And the government is doing its best to make sure that we're healthy. They're improving our lives constantly, and so we're quite happy. And I think that's part of what people outside of China miss at times. Another another important thing to remember about China is the importance of stability. As China looks at its past history, there have been lots of movements of chaos, of political turmoil, of civil war, nearly half of China's history. And so when they look at the Cultural Revolution, other times of chaos, stability is extremely important for the Chinese people. They have 1.4 billion people in their country. They feel we must have a strong central government. So when Chinese people see cameras on every street corner, they don't see it as an invasion of privacy. They see it as a matter of security, and it makes them feel better. Or when the government says everybody has to lock down, quarantines are enforced during a pandemic, they don't chafe against that. They say, yeah, this is hard, but it's important. It's important for all of us. We don't want chaos. We don't want things happening here that are going to cause problems for us. So I'd say that's another area that we sometimes don't understand about China. Is they're much more willing to put up with a level of lack of privacy, lack of individual freedom than we think they might be. Our idea is others are just chafing to be free like we are. Not necessarily the case in China.
We in the news, we certainly receive the idea that China is somehow malevolent and is seeking power around the world. In some of the things that you've written, you've noted that in the past, most of China's distant relationships have focused on trade rather than simply power for its own sake. Does that seem like it makes sense for the way we might interpret things now, or is that somehow different than maybe in the past?
Well, it's certainly a complex one, and there are probably much brighter minds than mine that could speak to this. But at least historically, China has not been as colonial or as imperialistic by any stretch of the imagination as Europe has been or the United States. Traditionally, their relationships have been ones of tribute, where neighboring countries recognize the power of the emperor, but in doing so, their country is not necessarily taken over unless they happen to go to war with China or rebel in some way or not honor China in the proper way. But they continue as they are. But there is a thing of sending tribute to China, recognizing China, trading with China, which is to their own benefit. There are exceptions to this. Vietnam is certainly an exception because Vietnam was colonized by the Chinese for about 1,000 years. Korea would be another exception. That there's been some incursion, and of course it depends how you view places like the western parts of China, of Tibet and Xinjiang. Certainly people there see China in a very different way. They don't see China in a benevolent way generally at all. But as far as China's dealings with the rest of the world, with other parts of Asia, their mantra is always not to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. And so China, of course, is present in a huge way in the Middle East, but also especially in Africa. The investment that is coming into Africa is quite stupendous. And there are a lot of questions about that, whether it's a new colonialism, not necessarily China taking over these countries, but running the businesses, building the infrastructure, having a tremendous amount of influence. A lot of the concern is sometimes that if you want to be friends with China, if you want to do business with China, then you can't criticize them in any way. And so that's why you see some of the tit for tat with the United States. We'll close an embassy and they come back and we'll close your embassy and we'll censure some of your lawmakers. Well, we'll censure your lawmakers. So there's just this constant, this constant back and forth at each other. Which is, probably going to be the case for the foreseeable future, because you have two superpowers colliding, and the question is how are they going to get along or not get along? And China certainly, you have those in the U.S. who say China is building its military. It has grand designs on taking over the world. That China would say no. We're simply interested in protecting what we have. We're not, we don't want to return to the period of time between 1840 and 1950 when China was completely humiliated by Western powers, where it was colonized, invaded and colonized by Japan. Their thing is simply, we're not going to let that happen again. So they do project military power and will continue to do so. And they will protect. Their sea lanes and other things that they believe that they deserve, much the same as the United States does.
Myrrl, thank you for some good things to chew on. You've once again, I think, given us a strong points of hope around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.